So if you clicked on this video, then you know Halo Campaign Evolved is about to come out, right? And ever since it was announced, I've kind of been asking myself the big question, right? Which is, can Halo Campaign Evolved, actually live up to Halo Combat Evolved? And to me, the answer is very obvious. It's no. There's no way. There's simply no way. But honestly, I think that's exactly what makes me excited about it, which is weird. It's kind of an oxymoron, but hear me out. All right. I think a lot of us have been kind of asking the wrong questions. We've been, comparing screenshots, gameplay clips, the lighting, the models and animations and everything that we've seen, right, with our eyes. And I mean, that's normal. That's obviously kind of just how it goes. That's what we're going to do when a new game is coming out, right? But, we're comparing these to a game that came out over 20 years ago. I mean, I don't know exactly how many years now, or about 25, right? So yeah. But the more I thought about it, the more I kind of realized that, Combat Evolved, it wasn't really just a game. It was kind of a moment in time before, nobody knew who Master Chief was. Nobody knew what even Halo was, nobody knew about the Flood, or anything, right? Every level was new. It was a discovery. It was an excursion on, on a new planet, right? Or a ring, I guess. And that's something no one can remake or, ever recreate. That's just like something that's very specific to the moment in time where this happened, right? So my thing is, Campaign Evolved doesn't need to recreate that history. It just needs to understand what Combat Evolved did and then build on that. And, as I've been thinking about that, I found myself asking kind of another question, and it's, why do I still replay Combat Evolved? Is it nostalgia? Maybe, but I don't think that's the whole story of it, right? So back in 2011, Halo Reach came out, and I was about 9. Reach was out already, and then Halo Anniversary came out, and at that time, bro, I'm 9 years old, right? So I thought it was the definitive version of Combat Evolved, right? I loved, mind you, I was 9, but I loved the visuals back then, and looking back, I realized, the original atmosphere and, the lighting and the tone that was set by the original was actually better. The 2001 version was better. It often, fit better. But ironically, my nostalgia wasn't for the original, the 2001. It was the Anniversary, the remaster, which is just weird thinking back on it. But, that kind of taught me that nostalgia isn't always right. I think we all understand that, but usually, our nostalgia is true. Usually, the games that were made back then are better. That's just how it is. Usually. Just for an example, they just dropped a port for Black Ops 1 and Black Ops 2, and look at all the people playing that game, and just look at how much or how well received it is compared to the new Call of Duties, bro. The new Call of Duties are just horrible. And, our nostalgia was right. The Black Ops 1 and Black Ops 2 were just better. It's simple. But, that's kind of why I'm, cautiously optimistic about Campaign Evolved. I know that kind of doesn't make sense, but for some reason it's making me optimistic about it, right? So visually, I think it looks great to me. Mind you, this is my opinion. It reminds me of Halo Infinite's art direction, which I actually enjoyed. I think a lot of people did for the most part, but since it wasn't old Halo, it's just it's got to have haters, right? But I think it did a good balance of Bungie's classic aesthetic and the modern gaming direction, which I usually hate, but I think it did a good job of balancing it, right? And Campaign Evolved kind of seems to be building on that foundation instead of replacing it, right? And then I asked myself another question: if the visuals already kind of look this good, what am I still worried about? So visuals aren't all. So I asked myself another question: if the visuals look good, what else am I worried about? And going through the gameplay and all that, the answer is clearly the AI. Because when Combat Evolved originally came out, the developers, Bungie, they were fully focused on making the Covenant feel alive. And it was great because, you'd have your elites, and right beside them, you'd have the grunts with them, right? It was just these little squad patrols, and the way they maneuvered, the grunts would stay up front until, you scared them, right? You pushed them, you pushed their face in, right? But, every encounter kind of unfolded differently. It was never the same. The loop was different. Yeah, every encounter unfolded differently. And kind of from what we've seen so far, I'm not really convinced that Campaign Evolved has captured, that same sort of cognitive behavior that the elites and grunts have. I mean, if you've watched some of the gameplay, like the elites will literally just stand there. And, you know, I don't know if that's fixed. Maybe it is fixed before it drops. But from what I've heard, you know, it's already 100% complete, right? It's gone gold or whatever. So, you know, my hopes are that it's fixed. But because honestly, you know, the smarter enemies matter way more to me than pretty graphics or whatever. I think most people agree with that sentiment, right? So then I asked, you know, another question. Why is my favorite mission on Combat Evolved the library? And I think most people would probably pick, you know, the silent cartographer or assault on the library, or assault on the control room, I bet. But you know, I always come back to the library. And why, you may ask? And I think it's just because Bungie didn't accidentally make the mission exhausting. Maybe they did, I don't know. You know, I don't know all the lore, but to me it didn't feel accidental. You know, you're supposed to feel overwhelmed. You're supposed to feel trapped inside of this Forerunner structure where, you know, Guilty Spark is just calmly talking to you, but the Flood are literally running you down, bro. And obviously the rocket launcher Flood, bro. We don't talk about him, but you know, they're closing in on you. The game really doesn't tell you humanity is like insignificant or anything, but it makes you personally feel insignificant in that moment with, you know, the Flood flooding you, right? And that's just like perfect design for a level, bro, to me. And I know it's very repetitive, you know, with the level design, but I don't really look at that part. I don't really look at the level design necessarily in Combat Evolved as a whole. I think it's great, but you know, obviously it gets reused. But it isn't necessarily fun because it's easy, right? Like nobody wants an easy level. It's memorable because everything was cohesive. It was all like a chord of instruments, bro. It was one, you know, it was the music and, like I said, the level design, where the Flood were placed in each, you know, it was very specific. The atmosphere, you know, the lighting, and then the sandbox with the weapons that you get. It all works together and it creates like just one great level to me. One of the greatest. All right, my bad. But you know, that's what I hope, you know, Campaign Evolved understands. And I don't want them to redesign the library, even though I swear I know they're gonna do it. But I don't want them to necessarily redesign it completely. You know, just because the library is like a lot of people's least favorite missions. But like, if you're gonna change it, preserve what made it effective, and then kind of use, you know, the modern technologies that we have now to, you know, to deepen the atmosphere and make the Flood more terrifying than they originally were, as, you know, when I was like a 9-year-old kid. Which is almost impossible, you know. Obviously I'm a grown man now. Grown man scared of the Flood, by the way. Low key though, if the lights were off, I might be scared. So I might have to try that. But anyways, so then, you know, I asked some of these questions, and these were just some of the questions I asked. You know, there's a whole boatload, a myriad of questions that I could have gone through in this video, but you know, I felt like those were some of the most important. But then I came to the final conclusion, or one of the final conclusions in my reflection before this game comes out. And the biggest reason for me, it honestly has, or the biggest reason for me to be excited has nothing to do with necessarily the graphics or the AI or whatever, the game design, the level, anything like that. It's because I'm gonna get the chance to play the game with my wife, which is like so random. But you know, I'm gonna get to play it with my wife because she's never played Halo. I haven't put her on like that yet. You know, she knows Master Chief and all that because I've talked about it all the time. You know, I even talked to her about, you know, the ways it's connected to Christianity and all this, and she honestly loves that, but she's never played it. Clearly I'm not being a good husband. No, I'm just kidding. You know, she doesn't know what's waiting on each level. She doesn't know exactly how it's gonna play out, and you know, she doesn't know why us Halo fans, you know, why we still talk about these missions and the game in general for, you know, for decades now. And it's like, you know, I'll never get to experience Halo for the first time again. That's just like a unique experience that everybody's had, right? But I do get to watch someone that I love, you know, experience it for the first time, bro. And I think that's really, you know, what a remake is for. You know, not to recreate my memories necessarily, but to create someone else's. And I think that's beautiful. Like, as much as I'm probably gonna hate this game, you know, if my wife can play it with this modern these modern graphics and, you know, the modern sandbox that it's adding, then I can appreciate the game. You know, I don't have to necessarily love it. But if this is a gateway for her to experience something that she ends up loving, you know, I'll take that. You know, I appreciate that. So, you know, in the end, can Halo Campaign Evolved live up to Combat Evolved? No, it just won't, as I've said before. and it's not gonna recreate the history. But you know, I think a lot of people are, you know, going into this with the wrong standard. As long as it preserves, like, you know, the mystery and, as I've said, the atmosphere and all this, and the feeling of discovery for new players, right? That made Combat Evolved timeless for us. Then, you know, I think it'll have accomplished exactly what it set out to do. And you know, in a few weeks, I'll be playing it while she experiences it, my wife, for the first time, and you know, I can't wait for that. So regardless of anything though, I am just happy to have more Halo, bro. I can't complain usually when it's more Halo, unless it's the TV show. Don't ever do that again, Microsoft. I will come for you. Nah, but for real, yeah, I'm just like, you know, I'm just honestly happy to have more Halo that I can play through. You know, I'm just trying to play my Halo, bro, and go to sleep. I got some other games though too that I want to play. But anyways, you know, I'll probably end up dropping, you know, my thoughts after the game comes out, and you know, maybe I'll probably end up hating the game, and I'll probably throw it or uninstall it and rage quit. But yeah, man, let me know y'all's thoughts if you're at this point in the video, which most likely you are not. But if you are, you're a legend. Shout out you. And yeah, thank you for watching. God bless. Deuces.